Good morning and welcome back to the Word and Journey podcast. Stories that shape us and make us think and hopefully just make us into better people. I think this is a really interesting story that we're reading and I think you'll be entertained by it. But I also was thinking about why we do this and the discipline of reading in general, and also of reading the classics, and also of not only reading classics, but reading books that are like of a particular caliber that seem to try to wrestle with deeper things and say something and are not just sheerly entertainment value. It's great to be entertained, but there's also a little bit more than entertainment. Stories teach us, they compel us, they shape us, and that is part of what we do here, is to become more aware of what is shaping us. So I suppose it's a mindfulness exercise in one sense. So again, if you like this sort of thing, please like, rate, review, share the show, throw us some dollars so I can pay an editor so we can do this more often and better quality. And I'm sure you will be grateful for that. Anyway, here I am with Joel Sommer and Caleb Keller. And good to see you fellas. How are you guys today?
I was
thumbs up.
yeah, I was scrambling to get this already, so I'm a little like, you're talking about mindfulness. I'm like, I could use like 10 or 15 seconds of mindfulness right now.
Right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's the tradition. So, something always goes wrong, and I guess the day when everything works perfectly might have to just be my last day. So, but probably not. I'll probably be really excited. Anyway, I'm glad you guys are both here. So we are here in spirit with Mary Shelley and her marvelous work of art, Frankenstein, which interestingly enough, so I don't know if you guys saw this, but BBC released an article talking about what they determined to be the 100 most influential stories of ever, and so I'll just kind of run up the top 10 just really fast. Number 10, the Iliad. Number 9, 100 Years of Solitude. I confess I haven't heard of that one. Number 8 was Hamlet. Number 7, Don Quixote. Number 6, 1001 Nights. Number 5, Things Fall Apart. Number 4, 1984. Number 3, Frankenstein, ours. Topped only by number 2, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and number 1, The Odyssey. So a variety of stories there, and I still have not read how they chose the things that they chose, but I am going through all of that just to highlight. So apparently this story is a big deal, and like the third biggest deal to like ever be a big deal. And now we get to look and see, well, what made it a big deal? And so here's a question before we get into the narration. So that me and Joel were wondering, is this a horror novel, or what genre is this? I'd be curious how you guys would categorize this story.
It almost feels more like keep interrupting each other, sorry. It almost feels as much, I don't know if suspense is necessarily right, but it kind of feels like in the tradition of classic horror where, horror literature, you have to convey a sense of like dread, of a sense of being ominous, a sense of eeriness. So it's almost, the horror comes more from like an atmospheric lens. And so I think in that regard, it does fit the bill. Because I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about how, again, I'm not sure how you guys were reading it, but I'm doing the audiobook. So I remember I listened to like a huge chunk of it while I was cooking at dinner. So you know how you have those odd associations. But what was really interesting, because I essentially did the first half, I was like, oh my gosh, they're, like Frankenstein's monster's really empathetic right now. Like really empathetic. Even though I know where this is going, I know what's going to happen. I was still kind of like really feeling for him. So I guess that's the part where that's not necessarily the horror that I grew up with or the horror that I know, where there was a section kind of like that when we're first introduced to Frankenstein, the doctor, and then the um, the captain of the ship as well. So it seems like overall it's in that horror genre, but it doesn't feel like all it is horror. That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with Caleb. It's definitely more of a, I guess, psychological and different type of lens than, I don't know. I guess I can't really speak to like the evolution of what the horror genre is, and even if that kind of genre existed when this book was written, if it was called like a gothic dark story or what it was called. But I can definitely see how it's a an imprint for kind of this inward outward kind of like devolution and kind of like who's who identity. And I don't know, I guess I could just speak from my personal experiences. The horror uh books and movies that I enjoy the most are kind of this type. And I watched the movie The Shining recently, which I think is maybe the scariest movie or for me. And there is some shocking imagery, but I think that that is a completely frightening movie in going into in a psychological and a thriller sense. And then the other thing I was thinking about is, even though I read this book a long time ago, it still kind of annoyed me on a tiny secret level when people would say, um, they call the monster Frankenstein. But now that I'm like reading the book, I'm like, maybe that's getting it right. maybe what's the difference if they're calling the monster Frankenstein or Dr. Frankenstein the monster? That's the point. Like that's the point. So I'm like happily humbled there a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, that does bring up a really good question of like what makes a monster, and maybe for next time for our conclusion we can surprise the audience and let everybody know what our favorite monsters are from any story, so we can think about that for next time. But yeah, so this has been a good experience for me. So again, I haven't read the book. This is my first time. I also haven't seen the movie. Essentially all I've seen is like a clip from Young Frankenstein, the spoof like years and years ago, and just a clip, and the Halloween costumes. And that's like been my only sense of like what the story is. And uh so I guess I had this idea, this imprint in my head of like, oh, it's about monsters. It's a scary story. It's a some way grotesque like that. And um yeah, and that understanding is really being reshaped. But as I'm getting the sense of it, it's because it's not bloody, it's not gory, it's not even jump scare. And there's I think, yeah, there's a suspenseful component to it. And think in storytelling too. The story is, I mean, it's a frame story, so we've kind of seen the end. We've seen into the end like already at the beginning, and so we kind of have a sense of where this is going. And I know, Victor Frankenstein, as he's telling his story, he's just, he's kind of brooding. And so he's already been like, oh, all of this misfortune which has befallen me. So we kind of have a sense of like something's going to fall apart. And we're just kind of waiting for that. So there's the suspense in that regard. But yeah, well, okay. So I'll get into that a little bit. But briefly, so a narration, so the audience can know kind of where we're at. So this is part 2 of the story, and 9 chapters in the middle. First part, Dr. Frankenstein was telling his story leading up to the deaths of his brother and his their I still can't remember what the relationship was with Justine, but 2 people important to him have died. And now in this section, he goes off into the mountains for some rest and repose. Beautiful imagery there. But while he's up in this beautiful place, he encounters his creation. He encounters the fiend. And now the fiend is coming to him as a suppliant and saying, hey, I need something from you. Here's what I've been up to the last couple years without you. And here now is the monster, the fiend's backstory. He essentially wakes up alone in the lab, goes out, he finds some clothes and he starts to go wander and just kind of has this emerging. He figures out what hunger is, how to forage for food and berries and things. Mostly avoids people until up in the woods he comes upon this family that's living there, and it's like a father and a brother and a sister, and then later like the brother's lover turned wife joins them, and essentially he's observing their interactions, and like just from observing them learns language like at a really sophisticated level. And at some point in there he also finds some books and teaches himself to read, and they're not like owl at home sort of books. It's like Paradise Lost, that most normal humans don't even read anymore. So so he gets a sense for, here's human companionship, here's human relationship, here's like a little bit of like human society. He doesn't quite know all of the world and politics, but he's starting to get a sense of like, just from watching these people and reading these books, here's some of like the ethics and the morals that make up what humankind are. And he's kind of content just to watch, but then he starts to really want to be with them, and then he makes a reach to try to connect to them. They're scared by his appearance, they reject him, he's devastated, and all of his love now like turns to hatred and resentment. And then he starts channeling that back at Victor Frankenstein, who is his creator, and holds him responsible for his anguish of being cut off from the companionship that he sees that other humans can have. And so from there, yes, then makes his way back to the town where Frankenstein's family is. He does kill little William, and he confesses that, and then so now he's tracked down Victor, and he's basically saying, there's no way I can be part of the human race. You are my creator, you owe me. Please make me a mate. Please make a female so I can be with her, and we'll go away to the Amazons, and we'll never bother anyone again, and it'll be better for all of y'all if you give me what I want, so I don't terrorize y'all. So please give me what I want. And of course, Frankenstein, is just filled with revulsion of the whole thing, but thinks and comes to the conclusion, actually, maybe it would be a good thing if I did that for him. So at the end of part 2 is he's agreeing to create a second being, a female in this case. So that being briefly the plot, be curious for you two, what are some other themes that stood out for you, from like a conceptual standpoint or a storytelling standpoint, or what's cool or interesting for you here?
It seemed like the monster had some class consciousness, which I appreciated. Just as he is first sort of observing the family that he's living near, and sort of making a commentary on how when they're struggling day to day to put food on the table and survive, and it was the class consciousness, but also it was really engaging to kind of observe him as he starts to gain empathy. Like I'm sure either we'll probably talk about this, but this spawned this concept of like something that was created and or something that's mythological or not from this earth, learning about empathy, learning about like a fish out of water basically, right? And this is kind of one of the first obviously goes of that, or maybe just the most iconic, I should say. And so to kind of like learn with him, or to hear him try to make sense of what it meant to be human. I felt like it was some of the stronger, not that anything was weak per se, but I just felt very engaged when he was kind of talking about how close they were, really keenly becoming aware of the different mood states of the father and then the son and the daughter. And yeah, so then for that to happen, and then as the plot unfolds, right, and they see him, and then he's interacting with all these other people, you just kind of see this fall from grace. But I don't know, it did bring on a measure of sadness, even though I knew it was coming, even though it was obvious. It was still kind of like the monster had potential. Like there was something that was happening within him that was pure and it was good. But then when he's constantly reviled, it just kind of messes with his own sense of self, his own sense of consciousness. And like you guys said before, bad parenting, right? Because he didn't have any like input there. He was trying to make sense of all of it himself. So in a way, his own ego was like, whoa, I need to be defensive of myself because when I interact with anyone, they hate me. So I guess I need to hate them.
Yeah. So yeah, if we categorize this as like a nature versus nurture discussion, sounds like, well, so there's definitely a lot of influence from nurture. Like the fiend is like not nurtured at all, and so there's that. Be curious. I'll have to think about if there's a saying about the nature, if it's the fiend's nature to be this way, or if it's all like put in him. Because he's kind of presented as like this like blank slate. But I would agree. Like, from a storytelling standpoint, to say here's a villain or here's a monster and then becomes good, like redemption arc. I mean, that's cool. Or just like a flat, like here's a really good character, we're gonna take him on a corruption arc. That's cool too. But this type of like, we're kind of like unsure. We kind of see the redemption arc starting, and then like something twists, and then we see them become corrupted when they could have avoided it, like that. There's a little bit more of a gut punch there. So, Joel, what are you feeling from this one?
I think, well, one of the things I keep coming back to from like a larger storytelling perspective is I keep thinking about how many different threads keep happening. Like I think the story has a lot of emphasis on narration and on storytelling with it in maybe a light meta way, where there's like, Frankenstein's monster wants to tell the story to Frankenstein, who, now he's relating it to the ship captain, who's now like writing it back. And there's like, it's kind of like, but I think there's not trying to be an obfuscation of like truth. That's trying to be like, there is a common truth that gets related, no matter like the idea of like the message being lost between telephone isn't happening. I think there's a bigger statement there, as the story kind of gets passed around. And then I think you posed the question, maybe before we started recording, like what are the more scarier parts of the story, and this kind of hit me when Frankenstein's fiend kind of makes his final pitch to the blind father, and he still gets stung with blows when the kids come home, and that's doesn't really matter how much work you put in or like what you're feeling on the inside or the outside, you're still going to be judged for where you are. And I think that kind of relates, I guess, to obviously to the monster, but also to the class problems and the political problems. And I think Mary Shelley does a really good job in that little family. Is it the Lacey family or whatever their family is, of just kind of nesting them as like a family unit within like a political structure that has a problem, and then they're like trying to solve all these problems, but they like shows this value structure, how, you know, love is important, and Frankenstein kind of like locks onto that because he's searching for love. And so he's like, maybe this is different than the town that has rejected me. Maybe I could like find that nurturing situation, that father and mother figure that I never had before. Yeah. So
I hadn't thought of it in terms of class structure until you guys brought it up, but I totally see it, and I think you're right that that is that is a running theme, and it's interesting the way, yeah, you look at the DeLacy family, and they're kind of on the outs of their respective societies, but even in their little mini society, they still create an exile, and but so yeah, it is an interesting little bit of social commentary about how it seems like, yeah, there always needs to be someone on the bottom for society to function, or so says a particular narrative, and it just, in this case, it's the fiend. But that was making me think again about this idea of, you know, nature versus nurture. So, you know, yeah, he's created. His creator abandons him. He doesn't have a parent or mentor or anyone specifically teaching him things. You know, he's uh, uh he observes some things. He gets input from these classics, these stories, and then he now has the input, the traumatic input of rejection, of being scared, of being hunted, and so there's all of these things. But what's like the nature part? It's like you guys are saying, like he's wanting love. He's wanting, or he has a sense of like, this is the thing that drives me. Like my core drive is to be integrated with the community, to not just be an individual, but to be together. And interesting that that should be the core drive of the being. That and learning, really, which completely threw me when we got there. Again, I had no idea what to expect, but I guess, again, thinking, you know, my only concept of the story is, you know, the Halloween costume, and here's this like kind of grotesque little monster. So I guess I think I was expecting more, oh, like monster, like "Roar," like, you know, grunting and stomping and everything, or like zombies or something. But actually, the fiend, the character he's most reminding me of is Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek, who's who created and has it built into him to want to learn, to want to become more human, to become brilliant, and everything. And then obviously different character, different, you know, they do different things with the Data character, but um but like what you were saying, Joel, like kind of noticing like the fiend, like we only really call him a fiend because he calls himself a fiend, and he only really calls himself a fiend because people are scared by his appearance. But like how he starts off is really just like, he's like a child wanting to learn and do his best and learn, and he just happens to have been fabricated instead of born. So it really does point the finger at like others in his life as being more monstrous, at least at first. So anyway, that's how maybe the fiend is maybe a little bit more like an AI than a zombie, perhaps. But
yeah, I had a comment about, I guess I was thinking about the physical nature of Frankenstein's monster, and you know, I guess the last couple books I've collaborated with you, Reese, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then also to an extent Dorian Gray. And I don't know if this is just coincidence or more of a theme of like late Victorian literature or whatever, but like especially with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's like even when he becomes this like disfigured bad character, he has this amazing physical strength. And he's able to like do these like feats of, I don't know, jumping and going through windows, and I think that sense is kind of lost on modern culture. And then also with like Frankenstein's monsters, he's often portrayed as this kind of like lumbering, kind of like really clumsy big monster, but in actuality in the story he's like super smart and also super lithe and able to do like, he's like really like a athletic, I guess. And so I was kind of thinking about that idea, but also very ugly. So it's like, I guess people are, and that kind of maybe goes back to this horror for me, where it's like you could even be like physically, like have this physical prowess and be super smart intellectually and be able to like learn languages and seek love, but you're there's still this like profound rejection that starts with the father for him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you're hinting at this theme that shows up in a lot of stories. We have this infatuation with the super, with the super, the meta, the being that is, faster, stronger, smarter, more beautiful, has some special gifts, is like, and I don't know, maybe that reflects like the human desire to become more, which I don't know, on a spiritual level, I wonder if that's, our yearning for theosis to, kind of come into the fullness of what it means to be in the image of God. Like we have a sense of like there's a more than us, and we want that, but we don't always have language for that, or like a right way to get there. And so we create these stories, these fantasies of like what we think better is, like, someone who's stronger or more impervious or smarter or something. Yeah, yeah, but it's interesting too. I guess I'm, thinking other stories where there's, like the mad scientist who like creates something and then loses control of it, which it kind of, this is a little bit like that, but again, it's like, but Dr. Frankenstein like wasn't even invested in this. Like he like kind of created and left, and so like kind of doesn't even have a claim to having sculpted or molded or like fallen in love with this creation only to be betrayed by it. He was just like, I made this thing and then I didn't like it, so I left it. And oh my goodness, this thing that I rejected is now coming back to like haunt me. Oh, and I'm kind of like, well, dude, what did you expect? So
Yeah, you find with other stories similar to this where like the idea is the scientist like gets consumed, and we sort of alluded to this in part one, right? But the idea was that he was consumed, and then he's like, forget it. And then it's just kind of that whole thread of it sort of stops. Whereas in a lot of the stories that we can think of, like in modern times, when there is a scientist that's like, whether it's like making a being or creature or trying to make an advancement, right? Because we're a little bit in the future and we're starting to make a little bit more critiques of enlightenment and that way of being in the world, then we kind of take what Frankenstein did to its logical conclusion. Like, what if he really got carried away? And what if, sort of how I'm assuming the story concludes, because I have not read it. So, yet with pop culture, I have some notion of how it's going to end. But the, basically, in a lot of modern stories, you get the sense of like, oh, this seems like a Frankenstein-ish character, and I know exactly where this is going to go. But now that that's a motif, now that that's a theme for, like we're saying, this like post-Victorian audience, they didn't know that. They weren't sure of that. So you can really see that that was, when we were talking about genre before, it's not necessarily that this is mystery, but it kind of is mystery. And then the other thing that I was thinking about is this came out in the 1810s, right? Or 1820s, somewhere around there.
I'll look at the book.
Regardless, I was gonna say, but I know that essentially we are several decades removed from Kierkegaard and existentialism, and then with existentialism comes postmodernity. But you see, and this is sort of what Joel was alluding to a little bit earlier, you sort of see that when you have like a meta angle on a story, or when you're explaining it from this letter or this perspective, or kind of revising your perspective on something, we see that as like, oh, that's kind of like what most stories do nowadays, but that's not necessarily what was the norm. So I think what I'm seeing a lot thus far in Frankenstein as a story is it pioneered so many things that right now we just take for granted. Like, oh, the monster isn't actually the monster, the creator. Oh, we're going to change your angle, or we're going to change your perspective on who is actually villainous. All those sorts of things that, again, for this audience in the 1800s, they didn't have conceptions of this. So I think that's why its influence is number 3 or number 4, whatever it was. Number 3. I can see why, right? Because I'm assuming that with stories like this, or any of what we consider classics, they're written and then literature is like somehow changed afterward.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's true. 1818, first publication. Yes. So a while ago, but yeah. So it's comparable to then Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. Again, you know, the role that Tolkien played in the fantasy genre was pretty impactful, and a lot of things are now in reference to that, whether continuing that or rejecting that or whatever. But like it's all in reference to that. And so yeah, we could observe that a lot of science fiction, a lot of adventure, a lot of mystery, suspense is now in response to this original the pilot episode of all suspenseful zombie films is right here. Yeah. So I guess that would be maybe we could kind of make this our last leg of things. But so saying this is an influential story, I guess, what is the way that this should influence us? And I guess that's one of my thoughts. And my other question still is like, okay, so what is, or what should be the disturbing part of this? Again, there's all of these concepts and everything, and we're kind of saying, okay, so maybe it's not quite technically like a horror thing, but I guess, yeah, what do you guys think is or could or should be its influence, and kind of within there, like what is or should or could be like the most scary, bothersome, like disturbing aspect of the story so far?
I think it's just, I know I've said this before, but just this kind of profound, or just this rejection and isolationism that the monster experiences. And I think in kind of conclusion of I guess the second section or second volume is just the idea, yeah, that I think especially Caleb's talking about, like, who's the monster? Well, it's Dr. Frankenstein. And then we have this, we're empathetic of the monster now. And then it kind of, at the end of his tale, it kind of reaches the murder. So we of little William. So we kind of revisit that from a new perspective of where the monster's been driven to. And then we almost kind of end with this situation. Well, maybe Dr. Frankenstein can maybe do the first, maybe arguably redemptive act, which is like kind of forgive Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster for the murder by being like, hey, let me help you find a wife, I guess. So that's more positive than what your question was, but I think it kind of, it's important because they're held in contrast of, and then it kind of pushes our energy into the next part of the story.
Yeah. The horrifying aspect is like what happens when a person's like isolated, like rejected, abandoned, and like who could do such a thing to another creature, something like that.
Yeah, it's horrifying that that no matter what the monster does, he just is continually rejected, and then to the point where we're as a reader, we're kind of like understanding why he was driven to kill on a certain level.
Yeah.
And in order to just express this, how much hurt he felt on the inside, and then also as a act of I don't know if disobedience is the right word, but an act of just vengeance against Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, thanks for that. What are you thinking, Caleb?
I was gonna say, I'll just piggyback right on that. Set me up. Yeah, so I think that the horrifying has been thus far that it's sort of been covertly talking about how much emphasis we put on the aesthetic or the superficial. So Frankenstein, when he's observing the family, It's kind of making sense of the world, their kindness, their purity, their love for one another. And then it's the way that he looks. And then suddenly there's this turn of how even they react to him versus the way in the village, when he was first, kind of roaming around in the village, they had that reaction to them. It almost felt like he was saying, I kind of get why they were all freaked out and spooked. They didn't know who I was. Like, I just stumbled upon it. Okay, I learned I'm not going to seemingly scare people in that way. But I think it's a really good commentary on as soon as something is either a person or a concept or anything that's unknown and it's quote unquote ugly, kill, destroy, eliminate. Like, our primal reactionary tone is violence. So, or at least this is what Mary Shelley's saying. And I don't think she's wrong. And I think that just like Joel was saying, we're kind of like, yeah, Frankenstein's monster, I get it. Like, you really were trying to do your part. Like, I'm even thinking too, like one of his most empathetic or sympathetic moments, I was like, oh, Frankenstein's monster, is the way that he was servicing the other family. I think he was like chopping wood, or I forget exactly what he was doing, but he was of benefit to the poor family that he lived near. And he did all of that like labor of love. And then they wanted to, react and then kill him. So if anything, the horror is something to the effect of, yeah, that rejection or the immediate animosity toward not only something that's like hideous and grotesque, but something that I don't know, something that, like, where was the empathy of any of the people that the monster interacted with? Where was anyone being curious? Where was anyone? And then again, I'm kind of thinking of like, well, what of our modern stories like The Iron Giant or How to Train Your Dragon, where there's something that's like seemingly scary or grotesque, but it's like a young kid and they're not scared of it or they're trying to understand it. But in this story, it's more like everyone universally, something about even viewing Frankenstein's monster. It conjured something in them. And I think maybe, to Shelley's credit, maybe that's what the real horror is.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, referencing like other stories where there's like a monster or like an ugly character. And kind of this motif is, again, you have the center, and then you have like the strange or the thing on the fringe, and that ends up being like the chaotic element. And we like stories these days where there's a bringing the strange into the center, and, integrating that element of the chaos. But this story is very much saying no, that strange, chaotic, different element is not one of us. There's not any unity possible with that, and so we're just gonna like keep it out there. And here, yeah, we get kind of portrayed, but that being is also like a being, and he's wanting to be part of us. And when there's no one to be curious, no one to connect, like that the sting of that rejection is really, really quite devastating. And again, not knowing what to expect, it's been really powerful for me to kind of connect with these characters. And yeah, kind of from the start, like, I mean, like, I kind of like connect with Victor. I mean, I'm not an academic or a scientist, so I mean he's already like a little hard to connect with, but this Bean character who's like, I'm on the outskirts, like I am on the outside, I'm being judged for something that I didn't control. I mean, like, every lonely kid in high school can connect with that. And like every marginalized person, or anybody who's had to like hide themselves or feel like they had to hide themselves because if they don't hide, they'll be punished or they'll be chased or something. Like, everybody can connect with that. And so there's a way where this like chaotic element actually becomes like really symbolic of, or the one like a little bit more easy to connect with. One other aspect of this that again, I'm wondering what the sensibilities would have been like 100 years ago. But part of what the monster is saying, when he and I couldn't quite find the passage here, but when he's railing against Dr. Frankenstein, he's like, why did you create me unable to be connected? But also like, why did you create me for no purpose? Like I'm just me. Like I have nothing to do, no purpose, no higher calling, and he gets into these really existential things of like, you just made me and left. What am I supposed to do? Like I have no identity, I have no community, I have no purpose. I'm just me, and that super hyper isolationism is torture for him. And so maybe that's also one of the horrifying things too, is like, what happens to a person, or what happens to a being when they're completely cut off from all of the things that make them a human? Like, is that even tenable? Can one even survive there? And apparently one of the ways a person survives that is by like turning to vice, or turning to passions, or like beginning to fight against the thing that rejected them, or so it's portrayed here. But yeah, that idea of like, I might get judged by just my appearance that I can't control, and that's not my fault, and I might not be able to achieve like the love that is kind of due to like any being, and then I might just like aimlessly flounder, like not have something purposeful to do, or not have any higher cause like that. That feels like what I don't know, for me, that feels like what's meant to be like kind of the truly horrifying aspect of the story. So
I have one more comment to follow up on that on the horror, and then also Caleb made me think of this, of just bringing in other stories. And another story that's popped into my head before is Beauty and the Beast. And maybe this is slightly more taking maybe a more Freudian or psychological look at it, but like in Beauty and the Beast, you could say that beauty is like, if you took maybe the commentary about like maybe marriage or some of the other things the story discussed, and just be like, Beauty and the Beast is one person, and you have the masculine side of the psyche and the feminine side of the psyche. At least you have the beauty kind of learning to accept the beast of like the masculine side, and then you have like an integration. But with this, and then you have the townspeople in Beauty and the Beast that want to come and kill the masculine because of the fear and the unknown. With Frankenstein monster, it's kind of like, maybe it's saying that like, science and doing, and that part is like a purely masculine side of society, and we've stripped all the feminine and the loving and the heart side of society. So you have this like, not just do we have a Dr. Frankenstein who's and kind of just chosen this bachelor life, and then like created a progeny that's like also just devoid of beauty, and only kind of like a doing, kind of thinking actor in society, and then just kind of stripping away the heart-sided feminine side. And then you kind of have the horror, I think, comes from just like this rejection of like, I guess, of like, did God create with no purpose? Is there no purpose? And if we only just, culturally, and then also like within family dynamics, and then personally, only want to seek one side of the acting, doing masculine side, we just become more and more isolated on every single strata of society. And that's just, that thought of that is horrible. And we can now, in the future, we can see how that has actually continued to play out as we become more science-based, and like not always like heart-centered.
yeah, we become disconnected from these vital parts of ourselves. Yeah. What's up, Caleb?
Oh, you're like making my mind go like really, really a lot. Well done. Yeah, I think that as you were talking, I was like, yes, enlightenment is a very particular masculinized way of being in the world. And so she's sort of responding to that. And surprise, surprise, who's writing this book? A woman. So that's kind of like the elephant in the room in some regards, is like, so she's going to have this lens of, I'm in this culture, I'm in this setting. I think last time I talked about, like, I'm willing to bet that she knew some Frankensteins in her life. Like, she knew some men that were so driven by, this utopian kind of like, Plato's Republic, like oh, we just need science, we just need reason, we just need to get to this level of, salvation through knowing. And Frankenstein's really smart. He knew how to build this creature, right? No one else had done that. But then the problem was when there's no character formation, no spirituality, no values, no morals. It makes me think of MLK has a quote where he says, character with knowledge, that's the true goal of education. So when you look at that from this lens, all Frankenstein's monster was able to glean was some kind of knowledge, and then, because he doesn't have that maternal or paternal presence. And then over time, again, as he keeps getting this reactionary, extreme animosity, then he just goes to that violent route. Then he just goes to that vengeful route, which we, as we're reading it, because, kind of going back to what you're saying before, he didn't have that feminine part of him, whatever we want to call that, right? And it's kind of stereotypical, but he didn't have that sense of someone giving him empathy, someone giving him kindness, someone giving him that love and nurture, looping it all back. And so because of that, again, it speaks to the horrifying. This is sort of what happens when, and we can reflect on it in today's society, right? When people are either traumatized or they live in settings and contexts with either without the presence of the maternal or the paternal, or just some kind of parental presence that is nurturing, kind, caring. Then you have the reactionary politics that we have now. Then we have the echo chambers that exist. Then we have all this kind of stuff, right? It's sort of the, like Mary Shelley called it 200 years ago, kind of where we would go, kind of where things would end up going. And so maybe that's what's horrifying.
There is that. Or I'm thinking too, I mean, something we Joel's sending up clapping emojis. I'm like, yes, I agree. So something we talk about a lot as counselors, especially when we talk about, attachment and trauma, we talk about the different hemispheres of the brain. And Caleb, everything you're talking about is like left brain sorts of things. Like when there's a over dominance of like the intellect, the logic, the cognition, all of this stuff that's like heady and ideas and like out there, and another way we could talk about what's missing is everything that happens in the right brain that's connected to the body, connected to emotions, that can intuit and really connect on a deep intuitive level with the other person. And a lot of the the research and the science points to like right brain deficits as the origin of high majority of all of the dysfunction that we see today. It's prominent in trauma and attachment and addiction, in depression, anxiety. It could be because what happens when the right brain is not able to develop or function is connection is not able to happen. And when connection is not able to happen, security is not able to be made. And where there's that lack of security, we do all sorts of things to try to find some sense of security, some sense of comfort, some sort of sense of identity. And it's what's meant to form between child and mother, child and parent. And when that's there, everything works. When that's not there, everything falls apart in some fashion. And so yes, Frankenstein, he knows a lot. He's very left brain. He doesn't do any right brain work at all. And then there's a fiend created. My other thought, Joel, I really like your comparison to Beauty and the Beast, and like how that story is kind of depicting, here's somebody who's like trying to bridge that gap between Beauty and Beast and everything. And then but when you were talking about like the mob, I was like, okay, so granted I haven't gotten to part 3 of Frankenstein, maybe we're gonna meet a mob. So far we haven't had any mob, and so far in the story for the first 2 parts, Victor is the only one who knows about the fiend. For a little bit, the DeLacy family, but the fiend is very hidden. And again, for me, because this is just where my head is, like, aha, a metaphor for addiction. This like source of like pain and chaos and unmanageability that is like hidden. This is Victor's scandal, or his secret vice or his secret obsession that he can't tell anyone and he hasn't told anyone like what he did or why he did it or what havoc it's wreaking. Which, I mean, for anybody who's in recovery or struggled with addiction, I mean, y'all know how that is. Like, you know, you have these secrets and they just start to consume your life, and you know, eventually it might, you know, spill out and destroy everything. You know, but anyway, sorry, I can't help but make addiction metaphors because it's just everywhere. So Frankenstein's an addict. Anyway, what would that meeting be like? Would it be like Mad Scientists Anonymous or something? Okay. All right. We should probably wrap it there. Any last quick thoughts, questions, concerns, or other fun literary references?
We should probably do a spoof of Mad Scientist Anonymous and release it on Halloween.
Yeah, that'll be really fun. Who would we have there? Okay, we'll have to think about that. That could be fun. All right. Well, we will come back one more time for the conclusion of this marvelous tale, and yes, maybe we'll also throw in there our index of favorite monsters through all of our favorite stories, and see how we come up there. So thank you all for listening, and again, please like our podcast and share it, and help us share this around, because again, people should read good books and books that make us think. I think it makes us better people. So thank you for being with us.